Hello everyone. This week we're talking about intergenerational patterns, and you watched the McGoldrick videos that showed how she does genograms with every family that she works with. And when I read your discussion posts, I heard that you had a lot of anxiety about doing your own genograms and writing your papers, and about grief and loss, and about some other challenges that you may have worked through with your family of origin already. You absolutely don't have to go where you don't feel safe going, and if you feel that you don't want to share certain things, you absolutely do not have to share them. This is for your own discovery and your own path through social work. So I won't be judging, I won't be doing anything but providing perhaps a little insight or just validating your experiences. So I have created my own genogram to be able to show you what I'm looking for. I'm not really looking for the lines like with the X's through them, or the crooked lines or anything like that from a typical genogram. I'm looking for more for the stories that transcend through the generations. So here is just an example of what I came up with for mine. So my grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side lived in Patton, Pennsylvania, which was a very small coal mining town. My grandfather was a coal miner, and at one point he had an affair with another woman, and that was a family secret, and my mother did not share that with us until after my grandfather had died. My grandmother was extremely angry and hurt by that, and she decided to tell my mother on her wedding day that the affair had happened. My grandmother had a lot of depression, which may have been related to the fact that her firstborn son died at 6 months old from pneumonia. She went on to have her daughter Donna, who was an alcoholic and actually a recluse. She lived in upstate New York, and she was never a part of our lives. Her sons Dick and Bill, and my mom Marjorie. And so I'll talk about my dad's side. So my dad's father's name was Sylvester Warren Hughes Sr. He was an only child, and he was adopted, and then his name was changed. And what's strange about that is that being adopted probably in the late 1800s, I'm not sure if that was common or not. He was a brilliant pianist, and he played on Broadway. However, my grandmother was a controlling person and kind of forced him to quit that love of his. So then he became a doorman in New York City, and he died from emphysema when we were quite young. And my grandmother, Mary, immigrated from Ireland when she was 18. She had 13 siblings. And when I was creating this, I'd never thought about this before, but I wonder if that was her way of cutting herself off from her family in Ireland. So she worked in the diner most of her life, and she also suffered from depression. And she had 7 children. My Uncle Johnny, who died from emphysema when we were in college. And then she had my Aunt Jo, Aunt Vivian, and Aunt Kathleen. And ironically, we found out that they had all died in the same year recently on Facebook. So it was like 3 losses in 2 minutes. And then I'll explain why in a minute. And then my dad, Warren, his sister, Marion, who he's extremely close to, she had breast cancer in her late 30s. And she had a young family. And my grandparents and all of her siblings, they ignored the diagnosis, so she never knew why she was dying, which is a horrible family secret. And my Uncle David is the only sibling still living today. So then we come down to my parents, Marjorie and Warren. So they lived in Norwalk, Connecticut when we were children, and then they moved to Ellsworth, Maine in 1978. And that was when my father's family totally cut us off it was like we had moved to Africa. They did not ever like communicate with us again for many, many years. And what was interesting is that my father was really the person that all of his siblings and parents like went to for emotional support, financial support, everything. So this was a huge loss for my dad. So he didn't really have strong differentiation from his family of origin before he was married or during the early years of his marriage when we still lived in Connecticut. In fact, my grandmother did not like my mother. My mother was a very strong, independent woman, and my grandmother thought that she was stealing her favorite son away, so she was really quite mean. So my mom, being who she was, decided that she would not have anything to do with my grandmother, but that my father could take us and continue to have relationships and visit with my grandmother. So, I'm bouncing all around. So my parents were married for 43 years. They were best friends and in love. They had a really unbelievable, healthy marriage. As you can see, I was born in 1966. My sister was born in 1967. My brother was born in 1968. And then my youngest sister was born in 1971. So you would think this was an Irish Catholic family. However, my mom was not Catholic. So people joked when I was in college that I must have had a white picket fence around my house, and we did in Connecticut. So I grew up in a really healthy family. And when I first started doing social work, I had some guilt around that because so many social workers come to this field because they've had their own experiences with trauma or other things. And I didn't have that. And so it took me a while to learn that what I had to give was based on the strong foundation that I had, and that I could give in a different way, perhaps, than other people who had different backgrounds than I had. So my dad, he dropped out of high school. He was accepted to a private school, and he only attended his math classes. So my daughter was wondering if he dropped out or if he got kicked out. Well, he might have been kicked out. I'm not sure. So he earned his GED while he was in the Army. He was a cook in the Army. I can't even imagine him carrying a gun, let alone shooting one. He was a milkman in White Plains, New York, as we were growing up. So he went to work at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and came home early in the afternoon. And my sister remembered just recently that we used to sneak down and have Twinkies with him in the middle of the night and not tell our mom. He then became a bus driver in Connecticut, and then after we moved to Maine, he worked at Hannaford, waxing floors and cleaning and being someone that bagged groceries. He did similar things at Rite Aid and then eventually became the manager. My dad was the most content person I've ever known, and he would have been happy cleaning streets. So he was a sports fanatic. He coached all of our teams. He drove to swim practice once a week. Teenage girls, because we didn't have a pool in Ellsworth. So he was just a constant presence in our lives. My mom had really healthy differentiation. At 16, she went to nursing school and she was a registered nurse by the time she was 19. She grew up in abject poverty, and she knew that the only way out was to become a nurse or a teacher. So she chose to become a nurse. She ended up being the head nurse on the pediatric unit in Greenwich, Connecticut. She backpacked through Europe. She was an exchange nurse in Denmark for a year. She was a women's rights advocate. She was independent and strong. She had always had a lot of faith, but she wasn't particularly religious. Ironically, she convinced a Catholic priest in 1965 to marry she and my dad and to baptize all of us. I'm not actually sure how she managed to do that, knowing what I know now, but she did it, and one of her patients' families, back then a lot of babies died, and they had had this antique cradle in their family for generations, and they gave it to my mom for taking such good care of their daughter Jenny, and we continue to have it in our family, and all of my babies slept in this cradle. And so it's just remarkable, as we talk about relationships and building rapport with people, how in the act of being compassionate as someone's child is dying, the gratitude that they expressed was through this cradle. My mom did have a lot of medical issues, a lot of back-related issues. She spent 6 months in the hospital when we were young, and her mother came and lived with us during that time, and it was not a happy time for me because my sister Maggie was the favorite. So that was a really strange time. My mom, she made a conscientious decision to parent differently than she was parented, and my parents made it look easy. Now that I'm a parent, I don't know how they managed to make it look so easy. So my mom conscientiously decided she wasn't doing it the same, and she I was gonna say about that. So my parents, in both of their families, education was not valued at all. And so one of the both unspoken and spoken messages in our family was that education was extremely important, and that we didn't have to go to college, but we needed to further our education, whether that be through welding or plumbing or becoming a beautician, whatever it was, we needed to go further our education after high school. So what I noticed about my family is that there were several cutoffs, cutoff when we moved to Maine, and then the cutoff that my mother-in-law with my mom's mother-in-law. After my mom died, there was a cutoff between my two sisters and my brother. So that was one of the things that stood out to me. There wasn't really any substance use through the generations that I could identify. There was cancer, wasn't really any diabetes, some heart disease, but my grandparents all lived into their 90s, so I'm not sure if that counts. So I don't think anyone was divorced. So it's just, mine's kind of boring, I guess, compared to some of yours. That would be, my parents had really equitable marriage. There weren't traditional gender roles. So we learned that everyone was equal. We learned early on that we treated people with dignity and respect. My parents always had a full house of people, whether it was our friends or people that they befriended. You never knew who was showing up for Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas. So this is just an idea. So instead of being caught up in the symbols of the genogram, it's really more about the stories that underline the people and about what we remember. So you might say to somebody, oh, can you tell me about your grandfather and what he was like? And you'll remember stories, like in the McGoldrick video when she asked the dad what he remembered about his wife, and then it came out that she, they had done theater together, and it was shocking. So families all have stories to tell, and even with young children, they can draw stick figures, they can talk about their memories. So it's a way to, and we'll talk more about this semester, but it's a way to hear people's stories and validate them and get a lot more information than just asking questions, because it's like putting it outside of yourself, and it's not as It doesn't feel as much as an interrogation. So however you choose to do this is totally okay with me. If you want to make the symbols, you can make the symbols. A lot of times people make a key at the bottom that just shows what things mean on their genogram. I know people put X's through people who have died. I've never done that and will never do that. So there's just a lot of different ways you can be as unique as you want to. In the past, some people have actually put photographs of special people on there. So again, it's really about you. Because my parents have both died, I asked my sister for information, and we really didn't have a lot of information, and she looked in an old family Bible and she could only not find very many things either. So there's a lot of things we don't know. We have a lot of cousins on my dad's side of the family, and honestly I wouldn't recognize them if I passed them on the street because of the cutoff. And when I think about that now, it's crazy to me that my children wouldn't know my sisters and brothers' children. So those types of things jump out at me. So anyway, I know that the intervention is one thing that you're all concerned about. And the intervention does not have, it's supposed to be simple. So while you're in graduate school, chances are you may not have had time to even have a cup of coffee with your best friend. So an intervention could be that you send a text message and ask to have coffee with them. Of course, during the pandemic, I'm not sure exactly how that would work. So what you're gonna do, like you could even think, oh, I'd like to write a letter to so-and-so. You don't have to mail the letter, like you can keep the letter and then just talk about what you think the response to the letter would be. And you might have different scenarios of what that might look like. So again, just be gentle with yourself. You don't have to do something overly creative, or it's all about helping us see how vulnerable our clients are when we work with them and how much courage it takes for them to share their experiences with us. So one intervention I had done, unbeknownst to myself, a while ago was after, almost 10 years ago now, it's crazy. After my mom died, there was a lot of hard feelings because my brother had stayed away from my mother and didn't visit her for a year and didn't allow his three young sons to visit. And so my sisters were really angry because my mother was devastated, and that was horrible. But after that, we found out that my brother had been in this really abusive marriage, and that his wife had threatened to at one point kill the kids, take the kids away from him. So he made choices that we didn't know about based on his fear of her and helping to protect their children. So at my mom's funeral, he was wearing a kilt because of our Irishness, and he was standing all by himself, and I thought, wow, he's all alone in this world, and that's not okay. So I started calling every week, and I would leave messages, and eventually he started calling back, and so we rekindled our relationship, developed a new relationship, but it took a long time for me to convince Maggie and Amy to join this new relationship. So I had to work on Maggie for quite a while, and Amy's still iffy about it. So, but that's like a pretty major intervention. That's not what we're looking here for. We're really just looking for, a simple intervention. Some people who have struggled with substance use write their children's letters, and again, they don't choose not to send them, or they might share them with them when they're older. Kind of mistakes that we've all made in our lives that we hope our children don't repeat. I'm trying to think what else. So you may have more questions about this. I'm hoping that I eased your anxiety about this assignment. Again, it's for you just to get some insight. So the cutoffs really stood out to me, and differentiation stood out to me. And so those might be things that I need to really think about before I work with families. And do my own feelings about being cut off from my father's family impact me today? I mean, I haven't really thought about it. Have I fully differentiated from my family of origin? I mean, the answer to that is yes. So it did, and it goes down even into my siblings group. When my parents died, we all grieved very differently, and I think that kind of surprised me at first too, like how we grew up in the same family, and our grief was so different. And now we all have our own children, and so it's just I don't know, it's interesting what comes down through the generations. So my last thing is that your intervention can simply be gratitude, to your partner, to your family, to your friends. It could be, thank you for supporting me through this graduate school experience. I couldn't have gotten there without you. It could be a random act of kindness to someone. It can be a very positive thing. You don't need to change anything in the intervention. So hopefully you'll be able to see this. If you have more questions or comments or just need more guidance, feel free to ask, let me know, send me emails. And I guess that's it for now. Since I talked a lot, I will probably save some of my feedback for this week until tomorrow, and I'll try and record that on Kaltura. So thanks everybody. I hope you're having a good week. Talk to you soon.